Hi, I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold the powerful to account. We tell you why it matters, why it affects you, and, of course, why you should care. Now, South Africa's economic prospects couldn't be worse as rating agencies downgraded 4 major banks amid stagnant growth and, of course, also the COVID-19 pandemic. This followed Fitch and Moody's decision to downgrade South Africa to junk status. Now, while government has rolled out several measures to beat back the pandemic, Treasury has come in for criticism for its silence as companies and poor communities battle to survive amid the inevitable economic fallout. Well, to take us into their confidence and to unpack Treasury's options to deal with COVID-19, I'm joined now by Deputy Finance Minister Dr. David Masondo. Dr. Masondo, thank you so much for joining me here on The Fix. My understanding is that you are in fact busy with Treasury officials to prepare a comprehensive document which you will put before Cabinet this Thursday. Can you please share with the country what that process looks like and what would be in that document?
No, thanks, Karima, for having me. I think we all agree that we are facing a huge economic crisis, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19, as well as the downgrading by the rating agencies. The government has been undertaking a number of interventions to cushion the people from the economic impact of this crisis that we're facing. There are a number of interventions that we've made. We've allocated money towards health. We've also did tax referrals. The Reserve Bank, on their own, they decided to reduce the repo rate. And we are in the process now of finalizing a document as National Treasury, which will present to Cabinet, which will add to more measures that we are already implementing as government to cushion South Africans, not only from the health side, but also on the economic side.
Now, Deputy Minister, this is, of course, uncharted waters. The globe is in an unprecedented situation. We've seen more developed economies take much more drastic steps in terms of economic policy options. We've got economists in the country that have written to President Ramaphosa asking for much more radical measures. And, of course, the rating agencies, with Fitch being the last on Friday, have rated South Africa's sovereign status down to junk. Given the enormity of the situation, are you going to go to financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank? Last week, Tito Mboweni, the finance minister, said you are indeed. Can you just update us on where those talks are at and whether it deals only with health or with loans in general?
Karima, you'll recall that when we presented the budget in February, we had a budget deficit of 370 billion, and that money, we have to go to get it somewhere because we don't have it from our tax revenue. And as government, we are looking at all options, including getting money from the new development bank in order to finance the fight against the COVID-19, but also to deal or to finance the structural reforms that we've got to undertake in order to put the economy back on its foot, because we do need serious economic recovery plan, which we're putting together. And as I said, this Thursday, as Treasury will be presenting it to Cabinet to complement, to add more measures which will help us to get out of this economic crisis we are in.
Now, of course, the major issue is the debt to GDP ratio that must worry you, and that is, of course, one of the factors that led to our downgrade. Let's come back to the IMF, because you didn't actually answer my question, Deputy Minister. Can you say for sure, when you say all options, that you are in fact approaching the IMF and the World Bank? And if so, are you approaching them in general because we have a crisis, or are you specifically approaching them in terms of measures to deal with health? I'll come back to the New Development Bank shortly.
The IMF, they have allocated. We're not facing serious economic issues insofar as the current account and so on. So what we are focusing on insofar as if we approach the IMF, it will be mainly for health reasons. Because remember, Karima, as a country, we subscribe to this funding agencies. We pay money on annual basis in order for us to get financial assistance when the need arises. But insofar as the IMF is concerned, we'll only approach them for health if we think that we are not able to finance our fight against the COVID-19.
Now, if you're saying that you are only going to approach them if you see you can't finance it, one doesn't have to be an economist to know that South Africa is in deep financial trouble, as it were, even before the COVID-19 breakout. We don't have the money. So can one then de facto say you are approaching these institutions? This is now the IMF and the World Bank.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now let's move on to the New Development Bank. I am going to be speaking to the Vice President, Leslie Marstorp, after you. But just from South Africa's side, we see the President tweeted that we are in discussions with Russia. We also saw the Health Minister saying that we are in discussions with China and Cuba to assist us. But take us into your confidence about discussions with the New Development Bank. How much money exactly are you asking from the New Development Bank, and how will you service that debt? Will you service that in local currency or in dollars?
Like I said, that's work in progress. Our conversation with the New Development Bank, it's work in progress. They've allocated 1 billion for South Africa, and we are in conversation with them to discuss the terms and conditions under which we will access or borrow that money which has been allocated for us. So at this moment, we are in conversation, it's work in progress. We have not yet finalized the conditions under which we'll access that money.
When you talk about those conditions, I'm assuming, Deputy Minister, you're referring to which currencies we are going to be paying that loan back in the event that we take it.
Exactly, including the interest and how long we're going to be paying that amount, all those conditions, and what purpose are we going to use that money for as a national government.
Now, one of the things that people are saying is that the issue around capital, flight is a big issue. Capital flows from the country, particularly in developing markets. Is government considering particular measures to stop that flight? Because that is one of the criticisms that have been lodged against Treasury, that you've been slow off the mark when it comes to that we need better protections.
Like I said, Karima, I think we are looking at different options to make sure that we protect our economy. I must indicate that in dealing with this crisis, we should not deal it in such a way that it makes it difficult for investors to come into South Africa, for them to say, look, in South Africa, if you put your money, when there's a crisis, it's going to be very difficult for you to basically diversify your investment options. So we have to be very careful in the way in which we deal with this crisis. in the manner that we don't deter future investments.
Minister, when I spoke to the banking associations last week in terms of giving people, holidays from paying bonds and so on, Cascovadia was very clear to say that they're dealing with customers on an individual basis, and the reasons why they are doing this is because, unlike other developed countries, we don't have room for that cushioning. Isn't it time that government thinks much more radically in terms of the banking sector? There's been discussions around, nationalizing one of the major commercial banks as a way to mitigate the impact, particularly for people who are having to face, bond repayments and rent repayments. To what extent, Deputy Minister, are you able to think outside of the box and provide, for example, our commercial banks with that cushioning so that they can pass on that dividend to customers?
Firstly, we have had discussions with BASA, the Banking Association of South Africa, and out of those discussions, they've agreed on a number of measures, including giving their customers payment holidays, deferring payments of their mortgages, and other loans that they have with the bank. So we've been having serious conversations with the bank, and so far they've responded positively insofar as helping us in dealing with this situation that we are facing. But I think post the stabilization of this crisis or coronavirus, we've got to have a serious conversation as South Africa on how we come together to finance the structural reforms that we need to undertake in South Africa in order to make sure that we grow our economy.
Now, Deputy Minister, the vulnerable populations, which includes workers and business during the lockdown and after the lockdown, affects 50 million South Africans. And of course, our responsibility is to concentrate on the majority of those workers. But a lot of the measures doesn't deal with the majority. If you look, for example, at the fact that 60% of South Africans make a living out of the informal economy, what is it that you're putting on the table to deal with that sector, given that it's very unregulated, and of course there are very little protections in place both for businesses and for people who are employed in that economy?
I think we are finalizing measures to target different sectors of our economy, including the most vulnerable sectors of our society, the informal traders and people who are workers in the informal economy. So I think we will definitely have a comprehensive intervention insofar as some of those vulnerable groups in our society.
Now, the fact that you are still looking at options, a lot of people will argue that that is just not acceptable. You should have been, rolling out this plan from the beginning. What exactly is the hold-up, Deputy Minister? We've already seen over 100 economists, for example, put the radical policy changes on the table, which I'll come to after the break. But why is there such a slow response from Treasury to scale up the efforts in terms of the economic stimulus package that we require at this stage?
We've, like I said, we've undertaken a number of measures, which include finding money to finance the health department in order for the department to combat this virus. There are, like I said, tax deferrals for small companies for 4 months. We've also reduced the contribution to UIF for a number of companies. There are a number of interventions that we have undertaken, including using the accumulated surpluses from the UIF to make certain interventions to a number of vulnerable groups. And insofar as the supply chain procurement issues, we've undertaken a number of measures there. We put together a transversal contract which makes sure that we buy in bulk so that we realize the economics of scale. And there are a number of interventions that we've basically made, including what the Reserve Bank has basically done to reduce the repo rates. We may quibble about the number or the percentage point that they've basically undertaken, but there are a number of measures that government are working through Treasury and a number of institutions in intervening under these circumstances.
All right, Deputy Minister, let's take a short break. When we come back, we talk about the possible economic policy changes, including giving people a universal basic income grant as an option to mitigate the economic hardships brought on by COVID-19. Don't go anywhere.